Hi there. Good afternoon. Good morning to everybody that is here today. Thank you for attending today's webinar. This is part of our continuing series, Tariff Trends 2025 on the new U.S. Customs landscape. My name is Marcus Eeman. I'm a Senior Customs Manager here at Flexport. And today we're going to focus on Section 232 changes. And for the record, we were always going to talk about Section 232 changes before Friday, but it feels extra topical this week. We have a good amount of content to kind of cover to talk about 232 in depth. And before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, on your screen, you see a sidebar on the right of the main stage. That's where you can submit your questions. At the end of the presentation, we'll host a Q&A and answer audience questions. Be sure to get them in early so we can review them. In the same sidebar, you'll see a tab labeled Docs. This is where you can download a copy of the slides and find other helpful resources. Above your screen, you have a button to request an ACE analysis from Flexport. We'll review that a little bit later in the presentation to talk about something. If you've come to our webinars before, you'll already know, but if not, please click that button if you want Flexport to reach out to discuss an ACE analysis for your business. Now, with that, just a brief legal note. Keep in mind that all the information provided in the session is based on the situation at this current time and may not be customized to your specific business requirements. We always recommend reaching out to a Flexport expert to discuss your particular situation. Joining me today is my colleague Anna Zajic, who is a Senior Trade Advisory Manager here at Flexport, and she's on our Trade Advisory team. And so our agenda today is we're just going to talk a little bit about the latest news, what happened on Friday. That's probably why many of you are here today, to find out what happened. And Anna's going to talk more about Section 232 in more general terms. What is this like? How does it compare to IEEPA in some ways? Then we're going to talk a little bit about, the Flexport difference. Like, how are we managing these Section 232 duties? And how can we help you manage some of these Section 232 duties with a demo of our tariff simulator? And with that, we're going to wrap up with a Q&A. So with that, I will let Anna here come off mute and talk a little bit about the latest news, why probably many of us are here today to talk about Section 232.
Thanks, Marcus. Okay, so diving right in, most of you are probably already aware that on August 18th, Bureau of Industry Security added 407 HTS subheading codes to the scope of steel and aluminum derivative products that are subject to U.S. Section 232 tariffs. But when you break it down, the subheading is really an 8-digit number. And when you break it down to the 10-digit code, there's actually far more products covered, as you can see here on the slide. Notably, the tariffs will be 50% ad valorem, but it applies only to the value of the steel and aluminum content, subject to certain conditions, which we highlighted, and considerations, which we've highlighted here. So if the value of the steel or aluminum content cannot be determined at the time of entry, the tariffs will apply to the full product value. And just keep in mind reasonable care obligations. You cannot assume that the steel or aluminum content is coming from the country where you source the derivative product. You actually need to do work with your suppliers to collect this information so that you can report it correctly. And the value, I should say. If the country of origin of the aluminum content is unknown, products will be subject to 200% ad valorem tariffs on the entry summary line item, which basically means it's going to apply to the entire line, and no deduction is available for the non-metal content. And just to provide some context for this rule, the original proclamation states that Russia is the 5th largest source of aluminum imported into the United States, and based on that macroeconomic factor, it's likely that it could be Russia, which is why, if you're unsure, you have to apply the Russia tariffs. Tariffs on UK steel and aluminum products will remain 25% ad valorem, which was effective July 9th. And then the non-steel content is still going to be subject to IEEPA reciprocal tariffs and the fentanyl tariffs and all other applicable tariffs that apply. And then US steel and aluminum content continues to be exempt. All right, so what's happening here? It's there's a lot of changes, and I think businesses may have questions about that. So if we look back to the February 10 presidential proclamation, that impose these tariffs, the president orders the Secretary of Commerce to establish a process for adding additional derivative articles in the scope of these tariffs. So the initial list was just that. And now Commerce, as a result of that, has created an online process where domestic producers and or a trade association can submit a request for products to be added to that list. There is a public comment process, but if a national security finding is affirmed, then the products will be subject to these tariffs. And I know there's some questions about what national security means, and we will talk about that soon. But generally speaking, there are three windows where three windows of opportunity where businesses can submit requests for products to be included in the tariffs. The first one occurred in May this year, and then subsequently the next one is September, and then next year beginning at these three intervals in January. So businesses should expect that the list of covered products will continue to expand based on domestic industry comments. So what is national security? I know a lot of people have trouble making the leap from a can of beer to a national security crisis, but the statute, first of all, why can the president issue these tariffs? Well, in 1962, the Congress authorized the president under the Trade Expansion Act to impose tariffs or safeguards in the event that there was a national security threat. And then the statute defines like specific criteria for that, right? So there's two factors that kind of rise to the top. One is the capacity of the domestic industry to meet production needs for national defense requirements. And this can include the availability of not only the materials, but human sources, products, raw materials, and other supplies and services. The other factor or leg to this is the economic welfare of domestic industries, which can impact U.S. employment, government revenues, loss of skill and investment, or other effects that result from the displacement of the domestic industry. And we'll talk about this later, but I think the slide makes it pretty clear that under the Section 232 tariff measures, there's a clear connection with injury to specific domestic industries and the capabilities of the U.S. to meet U.S. needs, whether it be defense or just general welfare. So let's talk about the history of the 232 investigations. So the law initiated in 1962. So the period of time between 1962 and 1995, which we're calling pre-WTO, there were 24 investigations that primarily focused on petroleum products, and one case involved machine tools. Only 8 of those cases actually resulted in an action taken, which were either embargoes and fees. And in the case of the tool, it was a voluntary export restriction by the offending country. Then in 1995, between 1995 post-WTO to 2017, we saw 2 investigations, and those investigations covered petroleum, but this time also iron ore and semi-finished steel. So you start to see like a pattern here in the current tariff measures. But in those cases, no actions were taken. And the reason for that is under the WTO, member countries agreed to use the WTO dispute settlement mechanisms and not impose unilateral tariffs. So then why then in 2017 did we see the U.S. President Trump take action under this statute? Well, there is a carve out under the WTO rules that states countries still have the right to take actions in defense of their own national security. Hence, Section 232 enters the room, and you see that 7 investigations were initiated covering what I would characterize as industrial building materials and raw materials, and some transportation items. And the actions taken in those matters were tariffs, quotas, but we also saw restrained enforcement because there were product exclusions available that were implemented to avoid disruption because the U.S. is not lacked the capability, or maybe the industry just didn't want to produce certain products because there's just not a lot of money there compared to the cheaper imports. So then in 2021 to during the Biden administration, there was only one investigation on permanent magnets, but no tariff actions were taken. Other actions were taken, but not using tariffs. So fast forward to 2025, the current Trump administration has initiated 9 investigations so far this year. And again, these focus on building materials, raw materials, and transportation type items. And the actions that we're seeing this time are tariffs, quotas, and product exclusions under the 232 tariffs are no longer available. So that restraint that we saw during the first Trump administration has been removed. In this one, except for maybe you could consider the non-stacking provisions. So what about court challenges? We see now that the IEEPA tariff actions have been deemed illegal, and then it's working its way probably up to the Supreme Court. But Section 232 tariffs are a little bit different. So we've outlined 4 major cases. You can see them in the footnotes. Some of them have been challenged and upheld, but the major outcomes of those court challenges were, number 1, that Section 232 is not an unconstitutional delegation of congressional authority, because the U.S. Constitution says that Congress has the power of tariffs and no taxation without representation, but the statute has specific conditions that you will see in the pictograph to the right, which we took from the Congressional Research Service, and it's based on the statute. And it says that basically a complaint needs to be filed or an investigation initiated by Commerce in consultation with other government agencies, and then they will issue a report with a formal finding and recommendations. And then at that point, the law authorizes the president to take actions based on those recommendations. And he can either act or not act. So, and he doesn't only need to use tariffs, but he can use tariffs. So something like that is a challenge like that is doesn't appear likely to succeed. So the second case that we're looking at, the court ruled that courts have no authority to assess the reasonableness of Section 232 actions, which are wholly delegated to the presidential discretion, and that's based on the plain language of the statute. The third issue that was settled by the court is whether the time limits in the statute or the pictograph to the right preclude the president from later modifying those initial tariff rates or expanding the scope of the tariffs to help achieve the originally stated national security objectives, where the underlying findings have not grown stale. So we've seen that in cases where the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum were raised from 25 to 50%. And the president has also talked about issuing, when the tariffs are levied on pharmaceutical products or ingredients, maybe they would start at 50%, but would likely escalate to 200%. And that is completely, according to this case, is acceptable, subject to those conditions. And then the fourth case involves whether 232 prohibits the application of different treatment of imports from different countries, if a rational basis exists to do so. And we see this happening with the country-specific agreements that are currently being negotiated. Namely, the UK has a different rate than everyone else, and Russia has a different rate than everyone else. So where do we go from here? So really, you need to know your tariffs. For Section 232, as Marcus said, we really wanted to just we knew we wanted to do a webinar on this because there's just so much here. So remember, like the non-stacking rules. So products subject to 232 tariffs are exempt from IEEPA reciprocal tariffs, but only to the extent that 232 tariffs apply. So remember, with derivative products, if you're not, the value that you're not paying the tariffs on will be subject to the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs. And also consider that there is some overlap between the steel, aluminum, and copper cases, meaning they reference the same products. So you may have to calculate them separately under each case where that applies, like if there's steel and copper in the same product or steel and aluminum. Products subject to Section 232 automotive tariffs are exempt from the steel, aluminum, and copper tariffs. And then the tariffs that do stack, products subject to 232 tariffs remain subject to normal trade relations rates of duty, which is just the column 1 duty rates. And then Section 301 tariffs, anti-dumping, countervailing duty, and everything else not specified here. There is a non-stacking provision that's specific to products from Canada and Mexico that are subject specifically for automobiles, automobile parts, steel, and aluminum. There are exempt from the IEEPA fentanyl tariffs that are applied to products from Canada and Mexico. And finally, duty drawback. Duty drawback is unavailable for the 232 tariffs. So it's really important that companies realize, one, if you're paying 200%, because you don't know the sourcing of the product on aluminum, and then realize later you can't prove where it came from, you cannot claim duty drawback on that if the goods are later exported. So it's really important to, look at the framework before you import goods that are affected, so that you can delay payment of duties until you're sure that the goods will be sold in the U.S. Two options available are the use of a foreign trade zone or a bonded warehouse. Reasonable care. So again, understand the tariffs, review your products to determine applicability and the impact. There's financial implications to consider, definitely, but also document these formal reviews, how you came to these determinations, so that you can demonstrate reasonable care and communicate your expectations or findings to your broker so that they can apply the tariffs correctly to your goods. It's becoming more and more complicated. I believe Customs implemented an update this year that allows up to 29 different classification codes to be reported on a single entry line. So, hang on to your chairs. This is going to get a lot more bumpy or difficult, but that's where procedure and process is really going to be helpful to manage those impacts. Obtain necessary documentation. So Customs has made it clear that they will ask for manufacturing documents for the country of cast and smelt for aluminum. Steel has the melt and pour rule. Steel and aluminum and copper content values, like how are you arriving at those values declared? Estimates are not allowed, number one. And then for the entry review process, make sure you review the entries and confirm that the correct rate of duty the duty is calculated correctly, and notify your broker if changes need to be made timely, because there are time limits on when refund requests can be submitted. And then prepare for enforcement. Expect CBP scrutiny on country of origin and value declarations to make sure that you can support those. Remember that a declaration submitted to Customs, even electronically, it can be considered providing false information. So it's really important to do that upfront due diligence care. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marcus, who's going to tell you about one of the tools Flexport has.
Anna, yep. We are going to talk a little bit about this here. What are some of the things that we can do, and how do we make it easy? And I think maybe if you kind of need to feel a little bit more of an illustration to try to make sense of all those stacking rules that Anna talked about. I just wanted to create one example here, just to look at maybe an exercise bicycle, that is Thai origin, 212 days of Section 232. A lot less fun than the 12 days of Christmas. But so say you have an exercise bike that's 30% aluminum, 20% steel. 40% of the value is coming from touch screens and sensors, the actual features users use, and then 10% comes from maybe plastic housing or other kind of supports. Well, the question is well, how much duty does I owe? How much duty is owed? And the answer to that is, well, when did you import it? And I put this together just to kind of illustrate this sort of a flow chart of how this goes out. If you go back 212 days to January 20th, Inauguration Day, this Thai exercise bicycle only had a 4.6% rate for the total. That top bar in blue is the total effective rate for this 30% aluminum, 20% steel bicycle. But then as we go, we start to see more entry complexity as well as increasing duty. And so there's actually like, I think like a hidden cost of all these tariffs, which is just the cost of compliance, cost of knowledge of trying to find out what's going on here. And so we see that, you know, on the April 5th, this was post-Liberation Day, we have 232 duties in place. So it's like, okay, we have this one that's exempt, right? We're exempted from IEEPA because there's 232 assessed. We have our normal base rate. On the second entry summary line, we have our declared aluminum value because exercise bicycles were only on the aluminum list back in April, as well as our normal rate. But then you may remember on June 4th, they introduced a few more things to Section 232, but critically, they also switched the order around by which brokers and importers need to know, okay, when do I apply Section 232 versus when do I apply IEEPA? What do I look at first in order to apply the exemptions from one for the other, right? There's an exemption from IEEPA reciprocal duties if you're paying 232 duties. So how do I know when I apply it? Well, Customs clarified that actually the 10% applies to the products that are not, or to the line that's not paying 232 duties. So you see in that first example there, not only do we have 4.6%, we also have 10% reciprocal tariff. This was where they had every country, you know, China was up to 125%, but every country was at least 10%. We still have our second line that remained the same, but they also increased the Section 232 rate. It used to be 25% when they first rolled it out, and then they switched it to 50% starting in June. We then go to August, where we started to see the reciprocal rates, the country-specific rates filtering their way down. And we see, okay, now we have a 19% specific Thai reciprocal rate, meaning, you know, driving up your total duty amount to 32.9% on this, you know, 20% aluminum, 30% steel, or I'm sorry, 30% steel, 20%, oh wait, 30% aluminum, 20% steel bicycle. We see the cumulative rate is 32.9%, and that's just based on calculating the 50% aluminum tariff on only 20% of the total bicycle value, or only on 30% of the total bicycle value. So even though the reciprocal tariff applies to the full value of the bicycle, of the exercise bicycle, we only apply the Section 232 to the aluminum portion. But then with the weekend news here, now this same HTS code, this 9506 code, is also now on the steel list. So that steel content that before we sort of ignored now gets its own entry summary line, further driving up the list here to 39.1% as the total rate. 3 different entry summary lines, 8 tariff lines across those 3 7501 entry summary lines. This is what makes things, I think, pretty difficult to sometimes wrap your mind around, is to try to know, okay, not only like, is my product affected, what is my total rate, and what is the interplay between all of these? There's so many exclusions and exemptions, and if like this thing applies, then there's this other thing here, and what about Annex 2, and what about if copper, if I'm paying it on this line? There are so many of these little breakouts and all these little rules that sort of play together. And, you know, I think at Flexport, our big advantage is that you bring your data as you have it, bring your product list as you have it, and we'll sort it out. And we'll sort it out on the back end, and we'll tell you how much it actually calculates out to. And so for that, I wanted to go through a few examples, I think, of this in action using our tariff simulator tool. So I'm going to pause here and share my screen just a moment. Okay, so here's our tariff simulator tool if you haven't used it yet before. And if you, by the way, this has been updated as of the 18th with all the new information that came out over the weekend. So if you're looking at this, actually it was updated on the 16th on Saturday with all the new affected codes. So if you are seeing it and you're like, wait a minute, I'm not seeing the new codes populate in, refresh the page, open a new tab, or maybe even clear your cache if needed. Okay, so let's just kind of go back in time here a little bit. Let's just go another example. This one is just to kind of show a little bit more of that bicycle example, just how bad it can be. Let's go back to January 21st. It was a simpler time where we had maybe extension cords from Brazil. And so an extension cord 8544, 8544.429010. It was just 2.6% and a single tariff line on a single entry summary line. And if you went back a year, this is how brokers would sometimes do their job. You just see this very simply here. And now we have to track this a little bit further. But as we sort of went a little bit further on, right, we go past Liberation Day, and we see maybe April 5, okay, this departed maybe April 4. We still have this because it has an in-transit exemption, right? It only departed on the 2nd. Those transit times between Brazil and the US is pretty quick. So far, so good. I'm just adding an extra line here, but our duty rate is unchanged. But with Brazil now, this has really just sort of gotten a bit out of hand. If we go to today, not only do we have it flagging for the aluminum amount that had been flagging for previously, we also have copper. These copper tariffs are now in play as well. So if we have 80% copper, probably 15% aluminum in this extension cord, very quickly we've gone from one tariff line or two tariffs on a single line to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 tariff lines across 3 entry summary lines with the value of aluminum and value of copper needed to fully and correctly declare this. This is that kind of complexity that I think we really try to make easy here at Flexport. We use this kind of same tariff information to power our tariff codes behind the scenes as these things change very quickly. I think another case that sometimes gets lost a little bit and has maybe slipped people's mind is this Annex 2 provision here. So if let's say we have maybe these some nails or tacks, we'll say it's from Chile instead. And we have like this program here. We do notice that there is this Annex 2 exclusion, right? Then we talk about all these exclusions, like, okay, well, how do they work? Well, this is on Annex 2, meaning it's not subject to the 10% IEEPA all country rate for Chile. The non-copper content would also then be free as well, but then the copper content would still have that 50% rate. So we are still seeing this here, but you can at least kind of see like, okay, here's how we can like save this here if there's something that's on Annex 2. I think related to this also is the French and the European case. And so I thought of another one that I thought, I had a question about. There was some French cookware for a French cookware company, of a household name that people might recognize. With this case here, we look at how, we'll just change this to France just to make it easy here. For this one, we're like, well, wait a minute, how do those IEEPA tariffs on the EU work? It's a 15% minimum rate. How does that actually apply? Well, you'll notice here this 15% rate is the base tariff plus X amount equals to 15. So you're like, well, wait a minute, how do I get, how is it 9.7%? Well, it's 9.7% because the combination of the base rate plus the IEEPA EU rate, the reciprocal EU rate, has to equal 15%. It's kind of a poor man's VAT, a non-congressionally authorized VAT is sort of how this has really kind of been functioning here. So you still have your steel breakout, but you still only have this 15% on that non-steel line. Of course, that non-steel line is pretty expensive. But if you're curious, like, wait a minute, you mean that 15% minimum, how does that work? Well, if I just look at maybe something a little bit different, maybe some like other kind of household articles here, you see the base rate was only 3.4, but now my EU rate went up to 11.6. So that's how you're getting that enforced kind of 15% minimum on that non-steel content for products of the EU. And that's kind of how that EU rate works as well. I'm going to go through, I think, one more here. I think I have time before we move into our Q&A. And I think this is kind of, if I think about what the administration is really trying to do, right, a lot of what they're trying to do is try to bring back jobs to the United States, to help try to reindustrialize the United States. That's the stated intent of many of these tariffs, either for national security reasons like 232, or just for general industrial policy reasons like we're seeing with IEEPA. So let's just say we look at our friendly neighbors to the north here in Canada and bring in an aluminum door. I'll just change this to Canada, right? And I'll just say also this is smelted in Canada. We have a $10,000 worth of doors from Canada, and even if you claim USMCA, you go from a total effective rate of 52.7% only down to 40%, which isn't, a huge step down. That's not really very valuable. But I also want to draw your attention to this part over here for like the landed cost. We see this door, and it's at $14,000 of landed cost amount, even if you claim USMCA. Remember, USMCA does allow you to exempt yourself from the normal duties. It exempts you from the base rate of duty, which is at 35% for the IEEPA fentanyl on Canada, but you still have to pay the 50% here. So even though you are saving some, right, based on this, actually, for an aluminum door, your aluminum value is probably close to like 95%, probably something like that, right? But what if, there is an exemption, a very powerful exemption that I think the administration wants people to use. What if you do get your aluminum for these aluminum doors that was smelted in the United States? Well, you're probably going to have to pay more because you have to have it made in the United States, which is less cost competitive in general terms on many products than Canada is. So you may have to pay more for this shipment here. So we have a landed cost. This is the Canadian USMCA of $14,700. Well, what if you had to pay $13,000 for the door, but the country of smelt is the United States? Well, your landed cost is actually $1,000 lower. So even if your cost of that door, your declared value on the import, is 30% higher than a Canadian produced door, if that aluminum content comes from the United States, your landed cost may actually be lower because all of a sudden now you're exempted from the 232 duties. Your USMCA exclusion is still exempting you from duty. You may be at 0%. It is still possible with some USMCA claims to find this here, but this is just an illustration of how even though if you're paying more for an item, right, your POs may be larger, you may actually be saving money in the long term. Now, there's other factors involved here, but I think this is very illustrative of what the administration wants to push importers towards doing. It's this kind of insight that I'm really excited that we can provide here at Flexport. And when it comes to USMCA, Anna mentioned it on her previous slide, just toward the end. She said, expect enforcement. I think we've kind of anecdotally been seeing more enforcement here at Flexport, especially when it comes to these USMCA claims, because now they're so valuable, right? If I take this claim away, all of a sudden this door jumps up 40%. USMCA claims are extraordinarily valuable now, and so they're being looked at with even sharper eyes. And I think we're seeing more importers do this. Fitch, the ratings agency, published a report last week that said in May, 56% of imports from Canada were claimed under USMCA. But in June, 81% of imports from Canada were claimed under USMCA. Now, they may be legitimate, maybe not. So often with free trade agreements, it's not what is, it's what you can prove. It's what you can show. Can you back it up? Not just do I have a certificate filled out, can I actually show customs that yes, this was produced here? All the non-originating materials underwent, their respective tariff shift. My regional value content is at the correct amount. Those are the things that customs is going to look for with these greater, increased claims on USMCA. Well, I hope this tool was handy here and you liked it. But let me bring Anna back on stage and we can go through a few of these questions maybe to address a couple of these here.
Hi, Marcus.
Hey.
So the first question is for you.
Oh, it is. All right, what do I got?
We're going to keep you working here. So the question is, aside from asking your broker, what is the easiest way to find a complete and accurate list of HTS codes affected by Section 232 tariffs?
Asking your broker. I hate to say it, but that is still definitely one part of this that is maybe just it is easy because brokers kind of have to have this list together. You can maybe reach out to kind of other law firms. This is something that if you're a customs customer with us here at Flexport, we have this readily available. We're happy just to send this over to you. But you can also just use like the tariff tool to power it, and you can look at the assembled things as well here. And I'm sure there's other websites and other our neighbors in the industry who are able to have this as well.
Yeah, good point. I don't know if the ITC Commerce has aggregated a list of all the tariffs, but the way that we do it,
that would be helpful.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
I sent an email to ITC to ask if they had like a nice reference chart, and they do not. So the way we've done it is really just kind of going through the Federal Register notices and developing our own list. So that's what's powering the tool that Marcus is talking about. And of course, companies can do that too. But if you want an easy, quick answer, plug it into the tool or reach out to Flexport. Marcus.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Anna, here's a question for you. I know you went over it briefly, but I've gotten a lot of questions, a lot of emails about this, basically since 232 duties started. It says there's a debate right now on reporting the raw value of the steel in an item as a percent of the finished good as to when it's been transformed and had the value added. So the
Yeah.
question is, when it comes down to like, okay, if I try to figure out what is my steel percentage, is it the percent of the steel value of the item at import? Or is
Mhm.
it the cost my manufacturer pays their steel supplier in some other country? What do I use for the U.S. import declaration?
Right. So, I mean, just under valuation methods, it's the value of the, strictly speaking, it's the value of the steel. And I've worked with a number of companies on this specific issue. And I can tell you no rulings exist yet on this topic.
Yeah.
But our understanding too, it's raw material cost if you can get it.
Okay. Raw material cost. Okay. All right. All right. Let's see what else we got. All right, here's another one for you, Anna. It sounds like if you don't know the copper amount of your product, you pay duties at the full copper duties. If this product is from China, in some cases, paying at the full copper duties is less than paying the China IEEPA duties, assuming these aren't stackable. Does that seem accurate?
No, because the steel, aluminum, and copper tariffs are 50%, and the highest rate of duty under the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs is 41% for Syria. For China, it's 34%. But the IEEPA fentanyl tariffs do stack on that part of the value, so you'd be better off breaking it out to the extent you can because it will bring that average down.
Well, and that was actually, a good thing to we noticed from those copper lists. Like in contrast to like both steel and aluminum, the copper list did not provide any kind of value breakout. It didn't say you just add, the non-copper content. Or wait, I'm sorry, it did say that, didn't it? I'm sorry, I must be
I
misremembering.
believe
Yeah, it did.
under
It did have that.
I
Yep.
think you're right. I think what you're thinking
Yeah.
of is like the 200%, and I see there's a
Oh yeah.
question about like the
Yep.
200%, like that only applies to aluminum. So where you can't make
Right.
that breakout. But all right, Marcus, I got one for you. How is tariff stacking with Section 232 calculated for IEEPA and Section 301? For
Mm.
example, if a product, let's say it's 100% steel, is imported from China and a HTS, which is a derivative product that's subject to 232 and Section 301. I mean, this is a mouthful here, but
Yeah.
will Section 301 still apply, or will all or partial IEEPA?
Yeah, yeah. This also relates a little bit to your last one here too, because it was saying, how do these things stack, right? So the IEEPA fentanyl applies, from China applies no matter what, and the Section 301 applies no matter what, and that
Yeah,
applies on the full value, full stop. Where you get to sort of do some tricks are based on the reciprocal rate, and then maybe on the 232 rate based on the value. That's where there's some sort of wiggle room, or there's some more interplay. But the reason why, Trump sometimes says, oh, the minimum rate on China is 55% now. Well, the way he's getting there is he's doing 20% IEEPA fentanyl, 25% 301 on many products, and then 10% reciprocal. Together that adds to 55%. So that's where that number seems to be coming from. But yeah, let's actually, I'm just going to share my screen just again here and go through an example. And yeah, so if we have one here, so anybody that's dealt with dumping in the past, this code for helical spring lock washers from China. This one maybe sounds a little bit familiar here. This one kind of says, it kind of basically answers this question exactly, right? So we have our 20% IEEPA applying here. I'm assuming the steel is basically 100%, right? So it's going to be a single line, but we're going to have IEEPA China, we're going to have the reciprocal exclusion. So you don't have to pay that 10% that I just talked about, or you don't have to pay the reciprocal China rate because you're paying 232 duties on this line instead. Now you're paying it at 50%, which is quite a lot. And this was also on Section 301 List 3. So together you're paying this 100% rate for this China example. So hopefully that kind of shows how this is stacking here and kind of coming together. Yeah. Yep.
cool. Thanks, Marcus. Here's another one for you. Is non-steel, non-aluminum content subject to IEEPA fentanyl tariffs for products from Canada?
Say it again. Is non-steel, non-aluminum content? Say it again.
Subject to IEEPA. Yeah, so I think what they're talking about is a derivative product that has like so the tariffs only apply to steel and aluminum, but what if it's from Canada? How does that impact the fentanyl tariffs?
The fentanyl tariffs will apply even to like the non 232 lines. However, there is an exemption if USMCA qualifies. So if it does qualify for USMCA, that IEEPA fentanyl, which for Canada is currently 35% as of August 1st, Mexico is still at 25%. If you have those, if it qualifies for USMCA and use the USMCA indicator, you are exempted from the IEEPA fentanyl from both countries. So you would be exempted from that on those lines. So that would take it down to zero. Plus the base rate would also go down to zero. Plus MPF would also be waived. So there is still quite a lot of value, like I mentioned, in these USMCA claims. Like there's still quite a bit of runway to use. And if you can back it up, right? If you have your documentation in order, that's the devil in the details. You can actually save quite a bit of money over this, even if 232 does apply to some or part of the value of the product. All right, Anna, let's find one for you here. What are the best practices in calculating the declared steel value content? What is kind of maybe the right way to do that? What kind of questions maybe should clients be asking?
Yeah, so I think businesses should be reaching out to their suppliers to get the value of the steel, aluminum, or copper content and the origin, obviously. But how do you document that? A bill of material is good for purposes of like making an entry declaration, but you need to go a step further than that because customs is going to ask for like total document traceability, right? So you don't have to do it for every shipment, but you should have a process in place to make sure that you and your supplier can produce the required documents, because if you can't, it's very possible that customs, test one transaction and you can't support it. They could go back and, disallow these exemptions for all your other entries. And, we are seeing that in other origin claims where CBP will take one instance and broadly apply it. So I think companies need to be thinking about, the framework that they have in place, including like agreements with their vendors in terms of expectations. So aligning on the expectations is a good start. And then, defining like what what your vendor needs to do to assurances they need to provide to you. But ultimately, since the importer record is responsible for any additional tariffs, or you really should test that to make sure that, what does a document look like once they give it to you?
So, I mean, I think I heard you mention in passing the other day when we were on a different meeting, you actually saw something like this with one of our clients. Could you maybe give us like an idea of like, what are some of the documentation things that they're even asking for? Like what kind of stuff is customs wanting to see to kind of substantiate some of these claims?
Yeah, I mean, we had two different, one was a withhold release order in connection with cotton, and the other was just a country of origin for a free trade agreement. But when you start to get into country of origin, they're looking for like total supply chain traceability. And I think when you think about the probability or potential for aluminum to come from Russia, I mean, they're going to ask for like production records. And like we had to produce like time cards and payment records to show that you are actually getting paid what you say they are and that this is the cost. So like I would expect like an end-to-end verification and create a process map of what that would look like to make sure that you understand what's required so that you can define that for your suppliers.
Yeah.
All right, Marcus, reading through the latest CBP guidance, are the codes listed in that communication also applicable to China? Or what guidance? Maybe like a CSMS?
I'm assuming so here. Yeah. So let's see. Let me find that one.
You want to pull up?
Let's see.
There's
I see what it's asking. Okay, so reading through the latest CBP guidance, the codes listed in that communication also applicable to China. There's reference to UK on the new list, so it's hard to tell if China imports are affected. Looking at the specific code, which is not always on the aluminum list, but now does it affect steel? Yes. So okay, there's a couple of things going on here. So yes, it does apply to China. It applies to every country, but the references to the UK are references to the UK trade deal that went in place. I think it was either June or July, where they got a lower 232 rate. Actually, I think it was June now that I'm mentioning it. they, instead of the 50%, they stayed at 25% Section 232. They're the only country that stayed at 25% for Section 232. So that might, I'm pretty sure that's what you're referring to, like the references to the UK. Like they have their own set of 99 codes. There's like special codes that or just get tacked on. The UK has their own version of those for the steel derivative list, the steel primary products, aluminum derivatives, aluminum primary products. Those got a lower rate than every other country. And so because of that, they are still applying here, but the announcement added new steel and aluminum products. That announcement said that the UK's special rate of 25% still applies, but you still have to use those special codes. And now those existing UK lists, which are the same as the rest of the world's, those are also updated to reflect these new flagging items that will still have to pay 25% if UK origin, but they don't have to pay the full 50%. So that was what that message was about.
Thanks, Marcus. So it looks like we're at time. So thank you all for attending. If you would like to request an ACE analysis from Flexport, remember to click on the link at the top of your screen. You can download the presentation under the docs link, and you should expect an email with a copy of the presentation and a link to the video if you want to watch it later. Have a great day.
Thank you.